Dzień dobry, Wojciech. How are you?
Hey, all good. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All well. All well. Long week.
Cool. You've been busy?
Yeah, for us it's been the first week back at the company where everybody's been back from the holidays. So definitely setting up all the priorities, OKRs for the quarter and the year.
Yeah, it's always a little bit, difficult getting the steam or getting the momentum back in, but it's good to see you guys are coming back
Yep,
late.
definitely. Yeah, good to be
Are,
back.
are you at DeSci London?
Actually, it's still to be decided. It's next Monday, right?
It's Sunday.
Sunday.
I believe it's over Sunday and Monday.
We might be. We are just waiting for the confirmation of one meeting on Monday, the 16th, and chances be there. Are you gonna be there?
I will not be there. However, our founder Josh will be there. So hopefully, if you can make it, then hopefully you guys can interact with each other.
Right.
So your voice sounds good. Will there be anybody else from Data Lake joining us?
We'll see. Dini was supposed to be joining our head of marketing, but he had a bad family accident that he had to attend to. So we'll see.
Okay, okay. Well, if anybody is in the crowd that should come up or can come up and speak, just point them out and I'll call
Right. Sure.
them. So
Sure.
usually what I'll do is I'll give it a couple, usually give it until about 12:05, just allow more people to kind of trickle in, and then we can get started.
Amazing.
Perfect. So, hey Harry, always good to see you here. Um, as usual, just gonna wait a few minutes for people to kind of stroll in. Um, I see that Twitter has added a music background button, um, but I think it's still a little bit glitchy because I can't quite get it to work. So we're gonna sit here in an awkward silence until we get going. So about a minute or two, just allow other people to keep rolling in, and then we'll get straight to learning more about data. Hey Ed, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in as always. You see Maria's here, so good to see you all. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to give it one more minute for others to get in, and then we'll get going. We'll kick it right off. Hey there, Tammy. It's good to see you as well. Um, Happy New Year to all who I haven't had a chance to speak with yet. I hope 2023 I think 2023 is going to be a great year, at least when it comes to building in this space. So I hope all of you have your aspirations, plans set out for, building great things this year. So I figure we can get started now. We have a good turnout so far. So hello everybody. My name is Jelani, and welcome to the 19th episode of the DeSci Rising series put on by DeSci World, where our goal here is always to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci World and wider DeSci community. Now, as always, the idea behind all of this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community using these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we are looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industries that exist out there. Now, in today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Wojciech Seroki, one of the founders of Data Lake, which is an organization and entity that is striving to build a secure, transparent, and privacy-driven medical data donation system, which I think is very ambitious and is very much needed in this new world that we're living in. And so, with all that being said, Vitami Wojciech, and thank you very much for taking the time today to help us learn about not only yourself, but the work being done at Data Lake. Wojciech, are you there? Ooh, looks like we might be getting some audio issues. Wojciech, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
I can hear you now perfectly.
All right, amazing.
So thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you. Um, and I don't know if you're trying to speak or not. I don't know, maybe having some audio technical difficulties. But Wojciech, if you'd like to begin, the way I kind of like to start this off is through team introductions. And so trying to learn kind of your origin story into this space and how this led up to the creation of Data Lake.
Sure, with pleasure. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we
Is
can hear
everything okay?
you. Yes, everything is fine.
Wonderful. I'm a medical doctor by profession, and actually my journey towards DeSci started about 10 years ago. When I started my first organization, which was actually a humanitarian organization, working in sub-Saharan
Ooh, okay, Wojciech, I think there may be some issues with your audio.
Africa,
You're cutting in and out.
17.
I'm sorry, but yeah, you're cutting in and out. It's being cut out. So maybe I don't know, reset whatever headset you may be working with.
Sure.
Cool.
Just give me 10 seconds. I'll try to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no problem. In the meantime, for those of you who I haven't greeted yet, Victor, I see you here, and a few others. Welcome again. Thank you for coming. I think this is going to be a great topic. Um, the medical records industry is in dire need of a revamp, and I think a lot of projects like Data Lake and a few others, Health Exchange here, will kind of help address that. So, Wojciech, you're back.
All right. Yeah, should be better.
Yes.
Apologies for. All right. Wonderful. Yeah. So essentially, the story started in sub-Saharan Africa, where I was living for a couple of years. And as you know, when there is absence of trust towards each other, towards the future, towards the government, and towards institutions, people tend to flock towards decentralization and trustless technologies. And it used to be big back in the days, and it still is in Nairobi and in sub-Saharan Africa. So that was the first time when I grew interested in Web3 and how it can address the fundamental issues of trust, because I've seen it actually working in the environment when the trust issues were omnipresent. And the data lake is co-founded by myself and by my co-founder Ligia, who's the director of a hospital federation in Poland around here, which is the member of the European Hospital Federation. And the idea for the project for Data Lake was born out of my experience of decentralization and Web3, and out of literally hundreds of requests that were coming towards the hospital federation for releasing and sharing of medical data for R&D and for other activities performed by the life sciences industry. So that was the kind of an origin story, going back to the African continent and back here, and that's how the project was born.
Okay, so the impetus here was that, so I guess maybe frame this to me and frame this to the rest of the listeners. So oftentimes third parties like medical institutions, pharma, drug will come in and seek for medical records to help facilitate drug development or whatever R&D they're coming out of, they're trying to come up with. You're muted if you're speaking. Wojciech, you're still muted if you're speaking. Uh, Not too sure. Maybe his connection is being rubbed. Let's give it a second. Wojciech, you are still muted if you are trying to speak. Sorry about this confusion, guys. I will try and ping him on a different medium. Oh, there you go. Sorry, Wojciech, you were. Oh, I will try to ping him on a different platform. Sometimes these Twitter app tends to run every once in a while. Sorry about this, guys. I'm still trying to get in contact with him on the back end to see if there's anything that we can do to allow him to speak more.
Sure, are you there?
Yes, but Wojciech, you were muted, and you're muted again. I think the connection issue is actually on his end, based off of that statement. Sorry about this, guys. Just bear with me for a few more minutes, please. All right, so Wojciech is going to disconnect and then reconnect, and hopefully we can get this going. There he is. Bring him back on stage. Wojciech, we have you back.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you. For whatever reason, it had you stuck on muted, and we could not hear
Right.
you.
Right. What was the last thing that you heard?
We were talking about your origin story, and I was
Right.
actually about to ask you a question in terms of um, in most cases, like to frame the concept of the use of the medical record. So third parties approach
Yeah.
hospitals and other healthcare, I guess, data centers to gain access to these health records for their purposes, their R&D and the like.
Yes, yes. So maybe let's focus on the problem first,
Yes.
because I think that that is incredibly interesting. So this is a problem that we internally at Data Lake describe as diabetes. Why? And I just hope that all you folks who have medical or biological background will appreciate the joke. Because like in diabetes, we have the abundance of something that is of tremendous value, of medical data that lives in the bloodstream of healthcare, in hospitals, in labs, in diagnostic imaging facilities. But what we do not have is we do not have the enzyme to be able to feed this data where it's much needed, which means research laboratories and startups and life sciences industry. So straight analogy to diabetes, we don't have insulin for the data. And why do we have such a tremendous problem with moving the data from hospitals, from healthcare providers to research laboratories? Well, there is a major collision of trends that takes place all around the world right now, where on the one hand, we have the trend that is driven by an unsatiated need for medical data generated by various entities. But on the other hand, we have the privacy protection trend, which is equally powerful, which resulted in the enactment of GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, with the new regulation which is coming up in Europe right now, which is called the Data Governance Act. And what it essentially says is that people should give their consent for the use of their medical data. In the majority of interpretations, even for the use of your anonymous medical data. And as you can imagine, it's a tremendous problem because, first of all, sourcing data without patient consent is very risky, unpopular, possibly even illegal. So, on the one hand, hospitals and labs are not able to monetize the data repositories they have without assuming an unacceptable level of risk and putting their main business in jeopardy in the absence of the patient consent. On the other hand, if you think about collecting consents from people, it's also not an easy task because you have to be able to reach the hearts and minds of people, of patients who are often not so digitally literate. There is no good communication framework to be able to explain to your 80 years old granny why her medical data can actually be of some use for future generations and for patients. There are very low levels of trust, essentially. And we believe that Web3 technologies are uniquely suited for solving the problems of trust. So, just to summarize, we have all this data. It's very hard or very risky to source the data without the patient consent. And there is a number of challenges that are connected with sourcing consents from patients. So, the issues of trust, lack of technology, and lack of incentives for patients to actually contribute their data to science. If you think about donation systems in healthcare, if you think about blood donation or bone marrow donation, and you also think about the analogy to data, just the same way that it's not legal to pay for blood or to pay for bone marrow, it's also not legal to pay for data or to pay for people consents. So even if you're a researcher and you're in dire need of the patient's data, you cannot simply buy them or you cannot offer monetary compensation for their consents and for their data directly. Essentially, data trade as such, it's not legal, compliant, or transparent. So we have this kind of incredibly complex landscape of healthcare players touching upon a very sensitive topic of your medical data in a very traditional and traditionally resistant to change ecosystem of healthcare. Well, how do we solve it then? And we are deeply inspired by the works on changing the social habits. And we actually think that to be able to address a problem of such magnitude, you have to refer to a habit that people universally know and accept everywhere in the world, both on the patient side and also on the side of the healthcare providers. That's why what we are building at Data Lake, we are calling the medical data donation system. Why? Because there are already hundreds of millions of people globally that understand the notion of donation in healthcare, that share their blood or bone marrow or organs or even whole bodies to help science, and they do it purely for altruistic reason. So the first thing that we are doing differently is we are referring to something that people universally know and accept. And we are saying that we are building yet another donation system in medicine, similar to blood donation, which we call the medical data donation. The second thing that we are doing is solving the issue of trust. So a challenge is, how do we convince patients, how do we convince your grandmother, who may be 80 years old, to share her medical records with scientists? And our solution is actually to make it incredibly simple for the patient, with no barriers to entry, in a way that can even include people who are digitally excluded. So what we do is we source consents and the powers of attorney from people. Takes 30 seconds to give, very simple, just 2 signatures on a piece of paper, doesn't hurt, no needles nor blood involved. Everybody can do it. And by virtue of having the consent and the power of attorney from the people, we actually have a legal right to request or even demand access to their medical data from different healthcare repositories. So first of all, really simple for patients, really simple both to understand and to do. The second one, how we actually bridge the barrier of trust, is by using decentralization and Web3 technologies. So we are using blockchain not to store medical records. It's actually a terrible idea for various reasons. First of all, you have to be able to prove the proof of location of storage, of geographical location of storage of medical records. And second of all, you have to ensure the right to be forgotten, for instance, under GDPR, which is very challenging if you think about on-chain storage of medical data. So what we do is we put on-chain only the consents and the operations on the medical data. So effectively, we are using the blockchain as the access management layer, access and permission management layer by the patients, and also as a transparency ledger. So everybody who becomes a data donor with Data Lake can A, give and revoke consents from the comfort of their home, and B, be informed how their data is used. Be aware of every single operation on their data that takes place. For instance, data harvesting event from the hospital, or data processing event, or data package anonymization. So second pillar of what we do is we actually build this ecosystem of trust that is powered by technology, and currently, which is co-created by over 35 organizations, including patient association groups, patients foundations, a couple of medical universities, and so on. So organizations that patients also know and respect, and that can be shown to the people as what we call the institutional layer of trust. So from the beginning, first, we make it very simple. Second, we make it trusted. Third, we make it legal. And finally, fourth, we actually make it profitable. So I've been working for years doing non-profit work, both in Poland and in sub-Saharan Africa. And I just know that for any kind of such ecosystem to be sustainable, as much as we want to change the world and do good and build a new donation system in healthcare, it also has to make economic sense and be economically viable for the healthcare stakeholders involved. And that's why we've also designed the whole ecosystem, the whole data mining ecosystem, that offers very specific incentives to different categories of players. We call it actually a consent to earn type of ecosystem. So what patients get in exchange of giving their consents and becoming data donors are actually 4 types of benefits that are targeted towards different patient groups. First of all, health benefit. If you are sick, if you have a medical condition, then you want to take action against the condition. You want to have hope for a better treatment in the future. So becoming a data donor actually gives you a way of taking action. So the first one is health. The second one is altruism. So we already have hundreds of millions of people who donate something of value, like blood or bone marrow, just to help others. And we are building a donation system that has way lower barriers for entry, for instance, no needles involved. And yet it allows people to access the same kind of satisfaction that people already are accessing by becoming, let's say, blood donors. The third type of value that we are giving to our patients is privacy protection. So with us, people are able to claim control, true control over their data, by virtue of giving and revoking permissions whenever they please, and being able to monitor the flow of data. So the third one is the privacy protection. And finally, the fourth one is we've invented a way of offering a meaningful reward or incentive to patients for becoming data donors. Well, how do we do it? Because at the beginning of the show, if I can call it that way, I mentioned that it's not legal to pay people for their consents and for their medical data. So what we do is we are not paying for consents, nor we are paying for people's medical data, but we are offering people rewards in form of a token that are exchangeable for health-related benefits, like discounts for medical services or medical products, that are proportional to the amount of time that people are actively or they are active data donors on our system. So we are not paying for consents, we are not paying for the data, we are rewarding everybody evenly, regardless of the fact if they are young and healthy and they don't have any kind of medical condition at all, or they are elderly and they have a number of, let's say, oncology or cardiology conditions, which makes their data sets particularly valuable. We don't differentiate that. Everybody is rewarded or incentivized in the same way. Yeah, so in a nutshell, summarizing, data donation system based on 4 pillars. The first one, simple. The second one, legal. The third one, trusted and transparent. And finally, the fourth one, profitable not only for patients, but profitable also for healthcare institutions that can finally engage in data sharing activities and being able to offset the costs of data storage, for instance, with hospitals or laboratories involved, for instance.
That was quite a an in-depth and comprehensive perspective on data lake, and I very much thank you for that. And it sounds like the system that you guys have built have taken into consideration a lot of, especially some of the limitations and worries and concerns that people have with Web3 in terms of, should medical data be on the blockchain and especially in the form of an open ledger, but also how do you address the ease and feasibility of making people become engaged. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to maybe go back a little bit towards the beginning in terms of, so you mentioned that, you're looking to address the digital illiteracy aspect of it. And I think that is a major sticking point or a major limitation or hurdle that I think a lot of the Web3 space as it pertains to the medical infrastructure and the medical record system, which is extremely outdated, has to face. So one means that you mentioned, and maybe delve a little bit deeper in that, is that you're getting in contact with people who have power of attorney or power of estate in terms of being able to communicate with individuals who, like you said, a 90-year-old granny. Can you go into a little bit more detail into how that comes about?
Absolutely, absolutely, with pleasure. So a question that we asked ourselves at the beginning of our journey, whether we want to actually solve a problem right now, which is a problem of secure medical data sharing, or we want to build a beautiful, product with all the ideals of Web3 deeply embedded in it from the very beginning. And we actually went for a pragmatic approach. So right now, there are two ways of giving your consent with data lake. The first one is you can go online into our system, you can log in the system, you can give the consent electronically, right? And that's the first one. And that's not the major one at the moment. A major way of giving consents, it's actually on paper. So you go to your healthcare provider the way you went to your healthcare provider for years, and you're offered a piece of paper with a consent form, the way healthcare providers were collecting consent for years. And you can give your consent in the hospital setup. You may or may not provide us with your email address and the telephone number. And if you do so, then we are going to send you the login credentials to online platform. But once again, if you're 90 years old and you've never seen a computer in your life, having your signature is already enough because that gives us the legal control over your data, and that is enough for us to access your data on your behalf. If you want to exercise control over your data, you may, and we are offering you the technological means, but it's not a barrier for entry. So you don't have to be able to use Web3 technologies or even use a computer to become a data donor.
No, that's a beautiful point. It abstracts the limitations that come with this, hyper digital aspect of it. Okay, and so I assume that this is only so I'm located in Canada, and let's say I wanted to opt into the data lake, medical record donation platform. Can I go to any university, any medical practitioner, or are there limited? So I guess my question is, have you formed specific partnerships with particular medical record databases that will allow this, or is anybody globally allowed or uh, able to come in and participate in the system?
Right. Another great question, and thank you for that. So once again, we are being very pragmatic. So we acknowledge the fact that we are a startup. And a startup, in our definition, it's essentially a business experiment. And we have to validate a number of business hypotheses along the way. We've already proven that we can get hospitals and patients on board. We've run our first data donation campaigns. We have quite good conversion rates with the first campaigns, reaching 31%. With the first university medical center with which we collaborated. But what we are focusing on right now is on targeting very specific patient populations with very specific diseases, in our case, first oncology diseases, because that allows us to build a full case of sourcing patients' data based on their consent, be able to deliver a product to our clients, which is life sciences industry, and sort of close the loop. So right now, we are super focused on building very specific cases with very specific data buyers and data providers, but the vision is exactly the point that you have outlined. So the vision is to have one universal framework for donating your data with your local healthcare providers, even in Canada. And where we see data lake in a couple of years is offering tools for other people to join the open ecosystem of data donation, to use our consent gathering system, to use the whole consent gathering framework, which includes both graphic materials and videos and scripts for the reception workers of the hospitals and so on, and replicate this type of donation systems in every single country. And if you think about how bone marrow donation works, it's actually pretty similar because you need to onboard millions of patients to be able to find a match with a matching bone marrow donor. And there are also organizations operating and building their bone marrow donation programs in multiple countries. So in that sense, we are not reinventing the wheel, but first we have to be able to prove that this is a viable business framework for other entities to take it and apply it in relevant jurisdictions.
No, absolutely. I see. It's, it's an existing system that is being addressed or applied to a current problem, which is the medical records. Um,
Exactly.
but I wonder, but I think I'm curious to see. So the medical record industry or the medical record system is, almost criminally known to be archaic. So if you go to a lot of places,
Yes.
even in the quote unquote modern world, first world countries, high income countries, you'll find that a lot of medical records are still non-digitized. It's
Yes.
how have you guys run into this kind of issue of, I mean, I know you're currently, you're very much starting now, but how do you envision tackling this issue of requesting medical data, but it's in a physical format?
We don't envision us tackling it at all. And
Fair. Okay.
my opinion is that, probably medical records as a problem and medical records on chain, quote unquote, as a notion, it's as old as the blockchain itself. And there were dozens of projects and dozens of companies that were trying to address this problem before. One of the reasons we actually think they failed is they were trying to address the wrong problem. So many projects before were trying to address the problem of interoperability and portability of healthcare records. Some even tried to address the problem of digitization of healthcare records. And it's a problem of such magnitude that even governments and whole states and the European Union failed to do it for many, many years. It's too big for a small startup. Yet, we all see a rapid digitization of healthcare repositories, and it's happening on our eyes, even accelerated by the COVID pandemics. And with our data sources, once again, we are very pragmatic. So the first data sources or the data providers for which we are going are not family physician offices that often store patient records in a closet, in a paper form.
Right. Yeah.
But we are going to providers that are already forward thinking and digitized, which also happen to be the providers that treat most complicated and advanced cases, which are most sought after by the data buyers. So I'd say that we just follow the law of distribution of innovation, and we are not going for the late majority or the laggards, but we are looking for the early adopters and innovators first. And they just also probably happen to follow a Pareto rule. And I'd say that 80% of the records that are truly valuable are stored with the entities that also happen to be quite well digitized.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I very much appreciate the pragmatic approach that seems to be, throughout the entirety of the ecosystem that is being built at Data Lake. Um, And so I guess my follow-up question is from the perspective, so we talked a little bit from the perspective of the data donator, but the endpoint user, so whether it be the pharmaceutical or whatever entity is interested in the medical records. So from their perspective, their quote unquote user interface with Data Lake is, do they come and they petition you for specific, so they'll come and they'll ask for a particular set of data or to address a particular, let's say, disease type. And they will pay Data Lake or some entity within Data Lake to then source that from your databases. Like, how does that work from the endpoint client's perspective?
Yeah, I think that you described it quite well. So how it works right now is we are collecting parameterized data orders. So a representative of a company comes to us and says, look, folks, we need records of, let's say, 1,000 patients with stage 4 small cell lung cancer. And we know that we would have to launch a targeted consent acquisition campaign specifically for these patients. So this is how we operate right now. We have the general campaign and the general communication framework to collect consents from whoever wishes to become a data donor. But we are also currently working on very targeted campaigns to be able to deliver very specific data sets already requested by our data buyers. So right now, because we are still a startup, it's still quite manual. So we gather these requests from different clients from different parts of the world. We assess what kind of requests have the highest probability of completion, and what are the resources that we need to deploy to be able to carry out the campaigns and source these data sets. And we just go for the most promising sets. So that's how we do it right now. What's the vision for the future? It's once we have a critical mass of consents and we are integrated with enough health providers, perhaps we would be able to source the data on demand. So you wouldn't have to procure a targeted consent acquisition campaign that would result in you acquiring your data set in a couple of months, but you would be able to place an order and get access to data within maybe minutes, maybe hours.
Right.
But for that to happen, we would first have to have consents. And second, we would have to be integrated with healthcare providers of sufficient volume of patient records.
Right. So once more participants are within the ecosystem, then obviously it becomes easier and less of a bounty where you have to go out and physically or I guess manually, as you put it, seek out these records.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And so the I guess the third component of the ecosystem, and is one that is shared in the Web3, I think people are most or not recognize the most, is this concept of the token. So you made reference to an incentivization
Right.
structure within the data lake ecosystem, and tagged here at the top, there is mention of a lake token. Can you give a little bit more in-depth insight into how the incentivization flow does work in data lake, and what the lake token actually does?
Absolutely. So I'll start the usual way. We are very pragmatic about it. So
Which I very much
why
love.
do we
I
need a
love that.
token? Yes, thank you. So why do we need a token at all? Well, if you become a blood donor, you also get some sort of incentive. For instance, in Poland, I'm a blood donor, and what I get in return is I get a couple of blocks of chocolate, I get some free city communication, I get some discounts for medical services, I don't have to queue in line in healthcare providers, and so on and so on and so on. So there are actually some benefits that are tangible, that are material, that have some kind of value attached to it, that are given to the donor. Yet it's not called trading. I'm not selling my blood for a block of chocolate, at least I hope I'm not. But I'm engaging in a noble gesture of sharing my blood to help other people, and I'm given a block of chocolate to replenish my sugar level, right? So this is how it's done right now. And how do we share something of value with people who decide to donate their data through the internet? Well, the obvious choice is to give them a token. And the token gives them access to health-related benefits. So very similar to blood donation. You get a token, you remain an active data donor on the platform for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then after that, you unlock the first level, so to say, of being a data donor, which gives you access to discounts for your blood work or access to a discount for your local gym, and so on and so on. Right now, we are actually technologically putting together the whole benefit distribution aspect of our system, which hopefully should go live in the first quarter of the year. So that's the first reason we are having the token. It's a way for us to offer tangible and meaningful rewards to patients distributed over the internet across borders in one universal ecosystem, and do it in a legal way without calling it, a direct compensation for data, but rather an incentive and reward structure, the same or very similar to how blood donors are already incentivized. So that's the first reason. The second reason is to have a common carrier of value for all the people involved in the ecosystem. And once again, one thing that we also do differently is we are not building barriers for entry for the players who do not wish to deal with cryptocurrencies. And I've been working in hospitals for quite some time, and I just know that up until now, hospitals are not enterprises that are mildly saying crypto friendly.
That's
So
yes.
yeah, so there is a group of stakeholders that needs to be rewarded with a token, which are patients. There's just simply no other way of doing that. And there's also a group of stakeholders that must not be rewarded with tokens because they just wouldn't be able to join the data donation ecosystem because of the risk perception of the legal departments. And these are hospitals. So there are some stakeholders that we compensate with the token, and there are some stakeholders that we compensate with a portion of the revenue in fiat. So once again, very pragmatic. And the way the whole business model works is that we are the ones who book the revenue into the ecosystem from the data purchase or the data sharing event. And then we distribute a percentage of the revenue back to the ecosystem players, which are data donors, so patients compensated in the token, which are data providers, so medical entities that allow us to access their repositories, which they don't theoretically have a choice because they have to make the data available to the power of attorney holder. But we also have two other important categories of players, which are consent collectors and integrators, which is a similar revenue sharing model to a franchise model, where we are saying that essentially anybody who uses our tools to collect consents from patients is also eligible to a percentage of the future revenue generated from these consents, as well as entities that help us to integrate repositories of different hospitals or healthcare providers, so-called integrators. They are also eligible to a percentage of the revenue generated by the repositories that they integrate. So in a nutshell, it's a revenue sharing ecosystem where we share the proceedings from the value generated by the medical data with the most important healthcare stakeholders.
Interesting. Are there no concerns as it relates to securities regulation when it comes to revenue sharing?
Well, there are always concerns if you talk crypto and
Yeah.
regulations. We are also being very prudent with that. We've sourced a couple of independent legal opinions when it comes to this model. And because the token is principally a voucher exchangeable for health rewards, it's not considered as a security. So for now, we are actually quite sure that we are good here. But of course, man, you never know.
No,
It's crypto.
right, exactly. And regulations change, nothing has been set, and that is just from the financial perspective, not even the medical and all that kind of things. And it kind of one question that I had to that point, if you let's say the most mature version of data lake is you have this interconnected global more or less decentralized network of participant
Yes.
players. How do you envision resistance from governments when it comes to having medical consent? So for example, if I'm an entity, if I'm a third party who's looking for medical data from in the United States, and I'm looking for data from cohorts of individuals that live in China, Russia, anywhere else on the globe, do you envision that there may be
Right.
difficulties when it comes to international, not secrecy laws per se, but these kind of international jurisdictions with medical data?
It's super interesting what you just touched upon. So let's look how it works all around the world, because people are different and societies are different, and they just value different things. So if you look how data is generally exchanged, let's say in China, this is a system that values more the collective and the government rather than privacy. Let's say so. Generally, medical data is nationalized, and there is good access to medical data by companies and entities that are affiliated with the government. Yet there is little transparency and control and regard for privacy on the side of the patient. So there's always a trade. You either trade off good accessibility of the data or you trade the patient privacy. The way it looks in the US is by, if you think about values of the society in the US, probably I'd say it's more corporate leaning. And under HIPAA currently, to my knowledge, no consent from the patient is required to share their de-identified healthcare records. So there are already corporations roaming freely on healthcare databases in the States and monetizing anonymous medical data, and consent is not required. So once again, more accent, so to say, put on the accessibility of healthcare records to the detriment of the privacy and the right to decide. And then you have the whole of European Union and recently California, which is also tends to be privacy leaning. And we have very bad access to medical data. In fact, we have something that the EU itself describes as the data poverty trap. So we have all this data, but we can't access it. Why? Because we value our privacy more than free access to the medical data. So there is no simple answer to the question, what is the stance of the governments for the medical data donation system, because it differs if you look at the values and whether it's more corporate leaning or government leaning or privacy leaning. In the EU, however, there is actually a tremendous regulatory momentum recently to try to solve this problem, also partially triggered by the COVID pandemic. So I also mentioned the regulation which is currently already enacted and coming into force in 9 months, which is called the Data Governance Act in the EU, which essentially says that it would be best if medical data exchange for R&D was based on data altruism principles. And data altruism means, to us, nothing different than data donation.
It's very interesting. It sounds like, as in always the case, when you bring in governments and policies, it gets a little bit complex. But it seems like you guys are trying to address or find at least a sweet spot to fit the more corporate leaning, more altruistic, and more privacy leaning individuals. And I think, ultimately,
True.
go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. I also think that there are some kind of problems that are best for the governments to solve, which, for instance, is the problem of interoperability of records and portability and the digitization, which we discussed before. And there are some problems that are not great for the government to solve. So, for instance, for some reason, other donation systems were or are not brokered by the government. For instance, the whole bone marrow donation system in the world, it's not a collective of governments working, under the United Nations. It's a non-profit, a grassroots initiative driven by patients, by doctors, by healthcare providers to create a donation system. So I actually firmly believe that this is the case with data as well.
Yes, no, I agree. I agree. Governments are very slow, and especially as it pertains to ownership, consent, and decision of data that should be ideally within the hands of, or at least the option should be there for self-custody of these things. So it's great to hear and to know that from the bone marrow perspective and the biotissue perspective, some of that seems to be speared by the individuals who are directly at play. And I hope the medical record industry does kind of follow suit. I imagine that it will as more systems come into play. We are seeing a surgence of data marketplaces occurring or popping up in the Web3 space, then I think that will help drive this shift. It's not a revolution, but a shift towards a more digital, more amenable, more interoperable system, which Data Lake will directly benefit off of, and then that will circle in and benefit the participants of the ecosystem as well. One question that I had is you mentioned is for participants they receive the token. And I don't want to spend too much more time on the token itself, but for the participants, their incentivization structure is potential medical benefits and this exchange of voucher as
Right.
a representation of the token. But
Right.
larger entities and larger aspects like data centers and hospitals, that is a revenue share. Is it possible for
Exactly.
individuals to opt into the revenue share in lieu of the token? Just out of curiosity.
Let me paraphrase the question. Is it possible for an individual to receive a monetary fiat compensation instead of the token?
Yeah, so we won't say monetary fiat compensation just in case, but of the same thought process, yes. Can they receive their incentivization in another format that is not necessarily the token?
Well, yes, because they can receive the token and swap it on Uniswap and exchange it for whatever they please.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to frame it because some people are interested in more than that, more than the voucher perspective. And I'm curious because I think the voucher perspective, I like the idea, but I wonder if it might be challenging to actually implement. So because you would have to form geographically relevant partnerships to kind of help facilitate that.
Yeah.
I'm in Canada. If you give me a gym membership in Poland, in Wasabi, that doesn't help me. But right.
True, but if you get 20% of your Apple Watch purchase,
Exactly.
or you get 20% in Nike store,
Exactly.
then maybe it would have been of interest for you. So there are some benefits that can be international. Plus, there are some benefits that are not always linked to physical assets, but they can be claimed over the internet, like access to educational materials or courses or books or exclusive, I don't know, Twitter Spaces, whatever you name it. But yeah.
No, that's great. And it kind of, so what I will do, because we are approaching the top of the hour, I will open up the floor to anybody who would like to ask questions to Wojciech. Please feel free to put in a request and I will bring you up. In the meantime, while people become unshy, I'll continue with my own questions. And so to that extent, in terms of building out this ecosystem, so you've already mentioned that you formed that you or you hinted at the formation of partnerships and strategic partnerships already. Can you delve a little bit deeper into any potential Web2, Web3 partnership that you've come together already?
Yes, yes. So far, we are working with. We already have binding agreements, which we announced, so I can share it with two major healthcare providers right now in Poland. One of them is Warsaw Medical University Medical Center. The other one is a hospital chain called Salve Medica. Other than that, we have, as I mentioned, I think more than 35 other supporters of the Data Donation Manifesto, how we call it, which is a number of patient associations, a couple medical universities, and so on and so on. So I think that the comprehensive and the whole list is on our webpage, and probably it wouldn't be that interesting for me to just keep on giving names, especially that some of them are in Polish and they are tongue twisters, man.
Yes, I have a friend of mine who is Polish, and it's always interesting starting to learn the Polish language. It's fun, especially writing it down.
Oh, you actually tried?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with my buddy, so I've gotten a little bit of Polish here and there. I can say thank you, hello, good morning, dzień dobry, all that kind of stuff.
That's brave. That's brave.
It is. Maria, I'm assuming you are the one who is behind the DeSci handle. Please feel free to ask your question. Maria. Oh, I hope we're not having audio problems again.
Yes, Jelani, it's
Hello.
me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Hi, Wojciech. This is Maria Freitas. I'm from São Paulo, Brazil, building a decentralized science ecosystem here. So really great to hear about Data Lake. Congratulations on the tokens launching. I heard that you want to create a value for the patients as well, and that you can. I want to discuss a little bit more of that. I think Jelani has asked you about other benefits rather than only medical ones. Really receiving the tokens as a cryptocurrency. I know kind of early there, but if the tokens can be bought by anyone, just like by me in the app and also in Uniswap, wouldn't they be considered a security for this reason? And this is one question. And the second one is, you keep using the term donors and for the patients. I do not know if this is the right term, because I'm really not really enthusiast of someone to donate something so valuable like their medical data. But this is more of on a philosophical side. And I would like to congratulate you again for this initiative and also for the launching. Thank you very much, Wojciech.
Thanks, Maria, for the kind words. So 2 questions. The first one is, are we not a security token if it's floating freely on the market and anybody can buy it from Uniswap and so on? And the second question is whether wording of using the word donor to describe people who share their medical records is an appropriate one. So let's unpack it one by one. The nature of the token. So I'll start with a caveat, like any good lawyer would start, by saying that I'm not a lawyer, and probably I wouldn't be the best person to engage in a laborious debate about the differences of utility tokens and security tokens, which also, by the way, differ across different jurisdictions. Right now, we have the legal opinion saying that we are in fact not a security token, and the main utility of the token is actually to be able to access health-related rewards and benefits, which, by the way, you cannot do if you purchase the token straight from the market. So right now, you have to become a data donor to be able to receive the token and have it in our benefit panel and be able to access the health-related rewards that we've designed for the patients. And the second one is interesting. So using the word donor, and we did it for a couple of reasons. First of all, we wanted to bear resemblance. We wanted our scheme to bear resemblance to other donation systems. So to be able to refer to something that people already understand and know. And the second one, I just presume that you refer to the fact that when sharing something of value, people also should receive adequate, let's say, compensation or adequate reward from sharing it. And look, that's also our firm stance on that and our value. We actually think that people should receive what they think is important for them, and people tend to value different things. So patients who are sick and they have a medical condition, they probably care most about health and potential scientific breakthroughs that can result from sharing of their data. And people who are younger and perhaps involved in the Web3 revolution and the DeSci movement would care more about receiving a monetary compensation in the form of a token. But the word donor doesn't necessarily imply that people do not have anything from sharing of their medical data. In fact, they do. They remain in control, and they can and they receive a number of different things that are important for different subcategories of people. But I think these were excellent points, and thank you for bringing them up, Maria. All the best with building DeSci in Brazil.
Great. If there are any other questions, please feel free to come up. Wojciech, Carolina, who is a member of the DeSci World core team, says that you have very nice voice in terms of your speech and conveying the message. So she very much appreciates everything that you've been saying.
Oh, thank you. Great that we are not joining with the video because I'm blushing.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to meet one time in the real world and things will go great. So as we approach the top of the hour, I'd like to ask you just 2 more questions, Wojciech. So first and foremost, how can, and if possible, can the community kind of help engage and help grow and help contribute to Data Lake? What best routes or avenues can people take?
Amazing question. Thank you. So 2 of them. First of all, let's stay in touch. Join our Telegram channel. We are trying to be responsive there. Everybody in the team is there, so we are able to handle all sorts of questions. Legal ones, business ones, token ones, and so on. So we'd love to see you there. And second thing is that right now we are trying to build a donation system to show that it's economically viable. If you think there are some partners with whom we should work that would help us to convey trust towards patients, that could help us reach more data providers and people who could be engaged in collecting consents, or perhaps somebody who could be interested in replicating our data donation scheme or system somewhere else in the world, we would be thrilled to speak. So if there's 2 things that we care about is having you in our community and being able to talk to you and exchange ideas. And the second one is links and connections and helping us to spread the gospel and the world, possibly bringing other partners on board.
Well, that is exactly what our mission statement is. And for those of you who don't know, we are currently trying to put together this global initiative of regional DeSci groups, DeSci Latin, Brazil, Korea, Japan, um, and other Africa and other places in the world. So we would love to kind of tackle this as a community, tackle this together. And I think Wojciech, Data Lake would serve both be beneficial for yourselves as well as the communities coming up to kind of plug you into that ecosystem. So I will be in contact personally with you
Amazing.
to see if we can kind of put that together and help push that forward. Um, and otherwise, yes, everybody else, if you feel free to follow Data Lake, to follow Wojciech. They're on not Instagram. I'm sorry. They're on LinkedIn. They're on Twitter. You can learn more about them on the DeSci World dashboard as well. So please do contribute. Please do go and help spread the gospel, as Wojciech said. Um, Last thing, Wojciech, if there are any other parting statements that you would like to leave off with.
I just wanted to thank you for a wonderful hour. Time spent talking DeSci and medical data, it's always time well spent. And thank you for deciding to spend your, well, here it's evening, Friday evening with us.
Wojciech, thank you, Dziękuję. I very much appreciate it. This has been a great discussion. So as always, everybody, this is the end of DeSci Rising, our episode this Friday. We will have a next one next Friday with another amazing guest and another amazing project. For those of you who don't know, still open your DMs because we will be dropping POAPs to the listeners. You can also watch previous episodes of DeSci Rising on our DeSci World YouTube channel. If you've missed any projects or any projects you want to learn more about, you can go there. And finally, if you would like to support ourselves and our initiatives and more of what we do, we have our microbes NFTs. These are integral to all of the DeSci World ecosystem, as well as the partners ecosystems that we will be integrating with as well. So those you can get on our website. You can mint them from our minting link. And if nothing else, then everybody, again, thank you all for coming. Dziękuję. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week for our next episode.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.